The moment Miles pushed open the door to their cozy Brooklyn apartment after an early flight back from his business trip, he froze in the doorway. There stood Theodore, his partner of 5 years, wrapped in the arms of another man, their foreheads touching in a moment that screamed intimacy far beyond friendship. The grocery bag slipped from Miles's fingers, scattering apples across the hardwood floor, and the sound snapped Theodore away from the stranger whose face Miles had never seen, but whose presence now burned into his memory like a brand. "Miles, wait, it's not." Theodore started, but the words died as Miles turned and walked out without slamming the door, because slamming it would have meant he still cared enough to make noise. He wandered the rain-slicked streets of Williamsburg for hours, the city lights blurring through the tears he refused to let fall. 5 years. 5 years of building a life together in New York after Miles had fled his conservative Texas hometown, where his father still sent awkward birthday cards that never mentioned Theodore. They had met at a tiny coffee shop in Manhattan when Miles spilled his latte on Theodore's laptop, and instead of anger, Theodore had laughed and offered to buy him a new one. That laugh had been the beginning of everything: late-night talks on fire escapes, shared Sundays at the farmer's market, and quiet promises that love could be enough even when the world outside their apartment whispered otherwise. Now all of it felt like a carefully constructed stage set collapsing under one spotlight. By the time he reached the East River, he pulled out his phone and stared at the lock-screen photo of the two of them smiling at Coney Island last summer. Theodore's arm around his shoulders, the wind whipping their hair. Miles deleted the photo, then immediately regretted it, but the emptiness in his chest only grew. He called his best friend Jake, who answered on the first ring, sensing the tone before Miles even spoke. "Come over, man." Doors unlocked. Jake lived in a walk-up in Bushwick, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and a fridge full of takeout boxes, but it had always felt like a safe harbor. When Miles arrived, Jake didn't ask questions, just handed him a beer and sat beside him on the sagging couch while the rain drummed against the windows. Miles finally spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I walked in on him with someone else, Theo, with another guy. And it wasn't just a hug, Jake. It looked like they'd done it before, like they belonged there together." Jake listened the way only a true friend could, without judgment, without trying to fix it right away. He had been there through Miles's coming out years ago, when his parents had gone silent for months before slowly thawing into reluctant acceptance that still carried an undercurrent of disappointment. "You deserve better than secrets," Jake said quietly. "But you also deserve to hear his side before you burn everything down." Miles wanted to argue that the side didn't matter anymore, but the ache in his chest told him Jake was right. Still, the image of Theodore and the stranger replayed behind his eyes, and for the first time in years Miles wondered if loving another man in this world had always been this fragile. He crashed on Jake's couch that night, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed outside. Memories flooded in uninvited. The weekend they drove upstate to watch the leaves change, Theodore's hand resting on his knee, the way he always ordered Miles's coffee exactly right without asking. How had it all overlapped with someone else? The question gnawed at him until dawn, when he finally drifted into a restless sleep. When he woke, Jake was already making eggs, the smell of coffee pulling him back to the present. "You going back today?" Jake asked gently. Miles shook his head. "Not yet. I need air. I need to figure out who I am without him, because right now it feels like I don't even know anymore." The words surprised him, but they rang true. For the first time, the journey ahead felt less like losing Theodore and more like finding Miles. Miles spent the next 3 days crashing between Jake's couch and long walks along the Brooklyn Bridge, the rhythm of his footsteps the only thing keeping his thoughts from spiraling. He avoided the apartment entirely, texting Theodore only once, a short message that said, "I need space, don't call." Theodore's replies flooded in anyway, apologies, explanations, pleas that Miles read but never answered. The messages painted a picture he wasn't ready to see yet, something about an old college friend named Liam who had shown up unexpectedly, and old feelings that had never fully died. Overlapping loves. The phrase lodged in Miles's throat like broken glass. He had thought their relationship was the only one, the real one, the forever one. Now it felt like he had been sharing Theodore all along without knowing it. On the 4th day, he forced himself back to work at the graphic design studio in Soho, where his colleagues noticed the shadows under his eyes but respected the silence. During lunch, he sat alone in the park, replaying the night they had first said, "I love you," on a rooftop in Queens, the skyline glittering like a promise. Theodore had whispered it against his neck and Miles had believed every syllable. Now that belief felt naive. His phone buzzed again, another message from Theodore. Please let me explain in person. I never meant for any of this to hurt you. Miles deleted it, but the words lingered. He called his mother in Texas that evening. The conversation stilted as always. She asked about that friend of yours, never quite able to say boyfriend, and Miles gave vague answers, dodging the truth, because explaining the betrayal would mean admitting his own vulnerability to the very people who had once prayed it would pass. Jake dragged him out for a drink at a quiet gay bar in the village, the kind of place with dim lights and familiar faces. You can't hide forever, Jake said over his whiskey. Theodore's been blowing up my phone too, asking if you're okay. Miles laughed bitterly. He's worried about me now? After months or years of whatever that was with Liam? Jake didn't push, but his steady presence reminded Miles that not every relationship fractured under pressure. Their friendship had survived Miles's early struggles with identity, the nights he questioned everything after his first awkward dates in college. Remember when you thought coming out would end your world? Jake asked. It didn't. It started it. The words landed heavier than expected. Miles realized he had been so focused on being Theodore's partner that he had forgotten how to stand alone as himself. That night back at Jake's, he opened his laptop and started sketching absent-mindedly designs for a project he had been avoiding. The lines flowed easier than they had in months, each stroke a small act of reclaiming space. When Theodore's name lit up the screen again, Miles almost answered but stopped himself. The misunderstanding was deepening, Theodore claiming it was a momentary lapse, Miles seeing it as a pattern of hidden truths. He needed proof or closure or both before he could face the man he had loved. The next morning he finally agreed to meet at a neutral cafe in Park Slope, the kind of place where they used to split avocado toast on lazy Sundays. Theodore arrived first, eyes red-rimmed and hands trembling around his coffee cup. Liam was my first love from college, he began before Miles could speak. He came back into town for work and old feelings resurfaced, but I swear it never replaced what we have. Miles listened, the words crashing over him like waves, but underneath the pain a quiet resolve was forming. He was no longer the man who would accept half-truths. The conversation stretched for hours, accusations and apologies weaving through the air until the cafe closed around them. When they parted, Miles walked away lighter, not because the hurt had vanished, but because he had finally voiced the questions that had been choking him. The journey toward acceptance had begun not with Theodore but with himself. Weeks blurred into a rhythm Miles hadn't known he needed. He moved his things into a sublet in Queens, a small studio with a view of the elevated train that rattled past like a reminder that life kept moving. Work became his anchor, the deadlines and color palettes giving shape to days that otherwise felt formless. His boss noticed the shift, praising the fresh edge in his designs, and for the first time Miles felt seen for his own talent rather than as half of a couple. Theodore kept reaching out, flowers left at the studio door, voicemails that Miles saved but never played. The secret had fully unraveled in their last conversation. Liam wasn't just an old flame, he had been someone Theodore leaned on during the months Miles spent caring for his sick father back in Texas. Overlapping timelines, overlapping affections. The revelation stung deeper than the initial discovery because it painted every shared memory with doubt. Had Theodore been comparing them all along? Then the call came from his parents. They were flying to New York for a surprise visit, his mother's voice bright with plans for dinner and sightseeing. Miles panicked. They had met Theodore once 2 years ago, a tense weekend where his father had shaken hands a little too firmly and changed the subject whenever the conversation turned personal. Now, with everything fractured, Miles didn't know how to explain the empty space beside him. He met them at JFK, forcing a smile as they hugged him tight. Over Italian food in Little Italy, his mother asked the inevitable question. "How's Theodore? We thought he'd join us." Miles swallowed the lie forming on his tongue, then let the truth spill instead. "We're taking time apart, Mom. It's complicated." The silence that followed was familiar, the same weighted pause from the day he had come out at 19. His father cleared his throat. "Son, life gets messy, but family is family. If he hurt you, you don't owe him forever." The words surprised Miles, carrying more acceptance than he had expected. For the first time, his parents' traditional expectations felt less like chains and more like a safety net he could choose to lean on or walk past. That weekend they walked the High Line together, the three of them talking about everything except the details of the breakup. Miles felt the layers of his identity shifting, the son, the gay man, the artist, each piece demanding space. Back at the sublet alone, he scrolled through old photos, stopping on one of him and Theodore at Pride the year before, rainbow flags waving around them. The joy in their faces now felt like a different lifetime. A new message from Theodore arrived. "I told Liam it's over. Completely. Can we talk about starting fresh?" Miles stared at the screen, the offer tempting but the betrayal still raw. He replied with a single line, "I need to figure out who I am first." The decision lifted something inside him, a quiet sacrifice of the comfort he had clung to. Friendship with Jake deepened during late-night talks where Jake shared his own stories of watching friends navigate similar heartbreaks. "You're not losing yourself, Miles," Jake said one evening. "You're finally meeting him." The words echoed as Miles lay awake, the city lights casting patterns on the ceiling. The major turning point was approaching. He could feel it in the way his steps grew surer, the way his sketches turned bolder. Love had tested him, and in the breaking he was beginning to rebuild. The confrontation came on a crisp autumn evening, when Theodore showed up unannounced at Miles's studio, after hours the security guard letting him in with a sympathetic nod. Miles looked up from his drafting table, the half-finished poster for a local theater company blurring as Theodore stepped into the light. "I couldn't wait anymore," Theodore said, voice cracking. "Liam was a mistake, a ghost from the past that I let haunt us. But you, Miles, you're my present, my future." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of months apart. Miles set down his stylus, the anger he expected to feel replaced by a strange calm. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 1,000 times, yet now it felt scripted by someone else. "You kept him in the shadows while I was building a life with you," Miles replied. "Every dinner, every trip, every 'I love you' had his shadow on it. How do I trust that again?" Theodore sank into the chair across from him, recounting the full truth, the late-night texts, the weekend Liam visited while Miles was away, the guilt that had eaten at him until he pushed Liam away for good. The revelation of the betrayal's depth, the overlapping months when Theodore had been torn between two loves, left Miles reeling but also strangely free. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the quiet street below. "I sacrificed so much to be with you, Theo. I moved across the country, I faced my family's doubts, I learned to love openly when everything in my upbringing told me not to. And you kept a backup plan." The accusation landed softly, but Theodore flinched. They talked until the studio lights flickered on timers, the conversation circling from anger to regret to the small moments that had once defined them. When Theodore reached for his hand, Miles let him, but the touch felt different, distant, like a memory rather than a promise. Outside, the betrayal had leaked somehow, colleagues whispering in the break room, his mother calling to check in more often. Societal pressure pressed in from every side, the subtle glances on the subway, the well-meaning advice from straight friends who couldn't quite understand. Yet, in the midst of it, Miles found his voice stronger. He started volunteering at a local LGBTQ center, helping young men navigate their own coming-out journeys, the work filling the empty spaces inside him. Jake became his anchor more than ever, their friendship a steady contrast to the rifts forming elsewhere. One night over pizza, Jake admitted, "I was scared you'd go back to him and disappear again." The honesty stung, but it pushed Miles to decide. He met Theodore one last time at their old rooftop spot, the city sprawled below like a witness. "I forgive you," Miles said, "but I can't unsee what I saw. I need to choose me now." Theodore nodded, tears tracing his cheeks, the sacrifice mutual in its pain. As Miles walked down the stairs alone, the turning point crystallized. He was no longer running from the truth, he was walking toward it. The psychological weight lifted with each step, the man he had been evolving into someone new, someone whole. The journey was far from over, but for the first time the path felt like his own. Winter settled over New York with a quiet hush that mirrored the stillness growing inside Miles. He spent the holidays in Texas with his parents, the first time in years without Theodore's presence at the dinner table. His mother set an extra place out of habit, then quietly removed it, her eyes soft with understanding. Conversations stretched late into the night, his father sharing stories from his own youth, stories of mistakes and second chances that bridged the generational gap Miles had once thought impassable. "We never understood everything, son," his father admitted one evening by the fireplace, but we see how strong you've become." The acceptance settled over Miles like a warm blanket, easing the old wounds of traditional expectations. Back in the city, he threw himself into new routines: early morning runs along the Hudson Gallery openings with Jake, where he met other artists who shared pieces of their own queer journeys. The misunderstanding that had lingered finally cleared when Liam reached out unexpectedly, an email apologizing for the role he had played, explaining that he too had been unaware of the full picture until it was too late. Reading the words, Miles felt the last threads of doubt dissolve. The secret had hurt them all, but the truth had set the stage for healing, even if healing meant letting go. Theodore's messages grew less frequent, then stopped altogether, a mutual silence that carried its own kind of respect. Miles began dating again, tentatively coffee dates and museum walks with men who saw him as he was now, not as he had been. Each encounter taught him something new about boundaries, about what he would no longer accept. Friendship with Jake evolved too, their bond deepening into the kind of loyalty that survives storms, the rifts of the past only making the foundation stronger. Societal pressure still whispered at the edges, a client's awkward pause when Miles mentioned his personal life, the occasional headline about rising tensions in the community, but Miles faced them with a quiet confidence he had never possessed before. He designed a series of posters for the center's awareness campaign, images that captured the beauty and struggle of loving openly, the work earning recognition and pulling him further into his own light. One evening at a gallery opening, he stood before a painting of two figures reaching across a divide and felt the symbolism echo his own story. The sacrifice had been worth it, the decision to walk away, not an ending but a beginning. Theodore had been a chapter, a vital one, but Miles was the author, now writing the rest with intention. The psychological consequences of the betrayal had reshaped him into someone resilient, someone who understood that acceptance started within. As spring buds appeared on the trees, Miles felt the high point approaching, the moment when past and present would collide one final time. The high point arrived on a warm May evening during the annual Pride Parade, the streets of Manhattan alive with color and sound. Miles marched with the center's group, his handmade sign reading "Love Without Secrets," catching the sunlight as he moved through the crowd. Halfway down Fifth Avenue, he spotted Theodore across the barricades, their eyes meeting in a moment that stopped time. Theodore smiled, a small, genuine smile free of the guilt that had once shadowed it. They found each other after the parade at a quiet bench in Central Park, the same spot where they had shared their first kiss years earlier. "You look good, Miles," Theodore said softly. "Happier." Miles nodded, the truth of it settling comfortably. They talked without accusations, without the weight of what-ifs, just two men who had loved and lost and grown. Theodore shared that he was seeing someone new, slowly, carefully, and Miles felt only a quiet gladness for him. The overlapping loves, the betrayal, the months of doubt, had all led here to this mutual release. Miles walked home that night, the city buzzing around him, but his heart steady. He had faced the truth, confronted the secrets, sacrificed the comfort of the familiar, and emerged with a self-acceptance that no relationship could ever take away. Jake met him at the sublet later with takeout and stories from the parade, their laughter filling the small space like proof that life continued, richer for the scars. Miles's family called the next day, his mother's voice warm with pride after seeing photos he had posted. "We're learning too," she said, and Miles believed her. The journey that began with a shattered doorway had carried him through every trial to this place of peace. He no longer needed reasons to stay because he had finally found every reason to live fully as himself. True or false? Betrayal in love always destroys the possibility of genuine self-acceptance and lasting happiness?